Yes, that's a classic philosopher for you. I mean, wrong door, wrong lunch. Just a word about the Institute, actually. Sometimes when people hear Oxford Internet Institute, that's very misleading, because of course nobody calls something Oxford something unless you're not the University of Oxford. No, you call the Oxford School of English, the Oxford Centre for something else, because you're not allowed to use University of Oxford. Now, the Oxford Internet Institute has been called that way for about 10 years now, and I think we're now just 12 years old, and it's an unfortunate name. It is a department, it's not an institute, and we don't really work on the internet either. So only Oxford can actually manage, of the three words, none of them is really very appropriate. Is a department of, roughly speaking, the social science division of the university. And when I say we don't work on the internet, it's because when it was founded, internet was the main focus, but today anything that is basically described within the institute as digital online life, or on life, as I prefer, is within the scope of the research of the institute. It is an institute in the sense that it's research only. We don't have undergraduates. So there's, as you can tell from my smile, a huge privilege in not having to teach anymore. Not that I don't miss it, but I can do without for a little while. Now, that enough about the explanation of the blue door in 1 St. Giles. It is, as you would expect me to say, a great pleasure to be here. The honest side of that pleasure, apart from the polite side, is because I don't get involved with the educational community at the research level too often. And I thought this was an opportunity that Nick made quite clear over the weekend I could not miss. So here I am, although I did try my best to miss it somehow. Now, as you may expect from a philosopher, the talk is going to be wide. Now, for anything of these 4 points, which are a map of the following slides, of course we could have a classic 8 weeks lecture back in Oxford. So my first apology is for the scope of the talk. The second apology is that the scope doesn't go together with the depth. So not only is wide, it's also shallow. I hope that it will provide some opportunity for the discussion in the Q&A session, but if you find that this is slightly too comprehensive, you can blame it on the philosophy side of the nature of the talk. Now, I know that you know, so if I something that I know you know is essentially in order to be on the same page. There is no attempt to patronize anybody. As I said, I know that you know. Now, the first part, sorry, let me just tell you one more thing about these 4 points. I should spend just a few minutes to talk about big data, because I know that you know, and then you heard so much. So there's no need for me to go through big data, what they are and why they are important again. I just want to make sure that we focus on a particular aspect of big data rather than all the others. Then I would like to focus on one particular knowledge-related or epistemological problem with big data. There are many others, but I like to focus on that one so that we move from big data, some aspects, one particular problem in terms of knowledge, and why that problem is connected to a particular ethical issue. And then, probably the third of the time left, I like to focus on a specific practical case. So we go sort of from the widest to the most specific aspects of the general issue about big data. Why do they cause some sort of knowledge-related problems? Why do they cause some ethics-related problems? And what one example, specific example of a problem looks like. This is what we all know. So just a nice picture so that we can all enjoy it after the coffee. It's the 3V definition of big data. If you check, there are plenty of attempts to add a fourth V somewhere. Viscosity, veritability, but the fourth V hasn't really taken roots. The three V's, on the other hand, are sort of common patterns. It's the discourse around big data. And of course, you got velocity down there, both in terms of accumulation and the event rates, how much we are accumulating by the second, and how many things are happening by the second that gets accumulated. So up there, the source and structure, the variety of all this data in terms of where they come from and how more or less or differently structured they are. And of course, volume. And is the terabyte, the petabyte, the zettabyte, the big byte, the humongous byte stuff. Now that is a good reminder, and so we are roughly on the same page. I will tell you a bit more about this in one particular slide where I like to make sure that we don't get sidetracked in understanding big data. But for the moment, just focusing, as I said, on the big side, volume. Now that picture, as many others, is staggering. It's always easy to be staggering with big data, but we were all born outside, outside the screen, on the white wall, basically. If you can't read, but this is 2009, and that's 0.8 zettabyte, and that's 2020, and that's 35 zettabytes. Did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? Even if half of it is wrong, it's still amazing. Oh, the 0.8 is from when we were painting on the wall of the caves until 2009. So that includes anything that's ever happened in the creation of data in the history of humanity up to 2009. Not even 1 zettabyte. Suppose they're really wrong, make it 2, make it 4. And suppose that 35 is completely wrong, make it half, 20, 15. It's still absolutely amazing. That's why the tsunami of data is so impressive. Bottom line, you find the cost of storage, which is decreasing again in a sort of amazing way. Now, as far as we know, this is not going to slow down in the future. There are basically 3 limits to the growth of data that we can envisage. Thermodynamics, because this stuff has to be handled by physics somehow. Storage, cables and stuff. Human intelligence, and there's only one intelligence that we know of, that's human. Just in case you thought that AI is going to be a solution, it isn't. There's no such thing as artificial intelligence that we know of. There's a lot of science fiction about it, but that's another story. And of course, memory. That's what really makes a difference. Huge, huge quantities of memory. There's more to be said about this, but because we don't have much time, I'd just like to, again, make sure that we are on the same page and just list very quickly the sort of problems that we find in this context. First of all, they're roughly in logical order, but I said roughly. We could reshuffle them a little bit. First of all, big data, they cause problems in terms of acquisition of those data. Remember the velocity at which we are generating data. And storage, where do we put them? We could open a whole chapter about the fact that since approximately almost 10 years ago, humanity on Earth, that's a bit of science fiction, there's no other humanity, there's no other Earth, but we on this planet, we haven't produced enough storage for the data we are producing. If you look at the quantity of data and the amount of storage produced, we just don't have enough memory as a planet. It doesn't mean that you cannot go and buy some more memory at the corner. But if you buy that piece of memory, I don't have it. We don't produce enough storage on the whole. And for people acquainted with a bit of philosophy or history, that is a huge problem. It means that some memory never gets recorded in the first place. Or something has to go out for something to come in. That is immensely significant. But we can't go down that road. That is the acquisition storage issue. Of course, we have a usability point. That's where education starts having a real bite. There's no point in having data there if you do not know how to use them. There's a security and safety issue because, of course, since all that massive amount of data are there, well, you need to make sure that, as I will show in a moment, security and safety are in place. There's an accessibility because availability, it's there. It's nothing unless it's there and I can have access to it. What's the point in having Luciano's telephone number if he doesn't answer his phone, right? Analytics, and I understand that you have already heard quite a lot about this, is that dark art that we don't quite teach yet at the university. There's no such thing as a course, no, a degree in analytics that you can take at Oxford University, but we have all students coming from different roles doing that now in one way or another. They come from physics, from computer science, from sociology, and so on. And all this comes with constraints. Constraints provided by law and ethics. And of course, at the bottom, as always, in life, there is one major issue, and that's money. All this cost. The acquisition, the usability, the security, accessibility, analytics, everything comes with a price. Okay, so that's just a quick walk why we have problems here. Lots of problems. Therefore, plenty of jobs for philosophers. That was big data in small minutes. What is the problem from a knowledge-related perspective? Those were all sort of big chapters, as were shelves where you could put books of analysis of issues. What's the little book called Epistemological Problems of Big Data? Well, that there are a couple of misunderstandings here that I would like to again remove so that we can walk more quickly towards the real message of this lecture. First of all, the problem has been with us for a long while. This is a very old, like years old, cover from The Economist. That we talk about big data today is just because the newspapers finally have caught up with the whole thing. But big data have been with us for a while. The epistemological or knowledge-related problem with big data has therefore been with us for a while. You can think of old money as CERN, particle physics, big data, or new money, Facebook, Google, as different people who have been dealing with that particular cover for some time. So what is the problem with big data and what is not? One thing that is not is, oh, we got too many. That's like complaining that you go to a restaurant and the menu offers too many options. Right? Seriously? Oh, we got too much food. Well, that's a nice problem to have. It's like deciding that you have too much money in your bank account. Now, once you got that kind of problem, I don't know how to invest it on. Well, you like to be on that side of the problem. So, big data are a great resource. The problem cannot be too many of them straightforward. They're a great resource, and here I start getting closer to the education research issue, because of all these features that they have. You can use them to improve, you can use them to tailor your information, you can use them to predict the future, you can use them to simulate the future without having to run real experiments in real life. You can use them to decide, you can use them to innovate. Now these are all standard topics you find again and again in the literature when people have to sell big data. No, IBM's, oh, we've got all these beautiful things. More, better. Not quite. There is a problem. But the problem cannot be too many. The problem is not we don't have enough computer power. That's one entry as good as any other. On Wikipedia, last time I checked, probably changed already, on big data. The definition runs, data sets so large and complex that it becomes difficult to process using on-hand database management tools or traditional data processing applications. Now, apart from being a little bit of an academic and describing big with large, the student wouldn't pass. No? You don't tell me there's something that is big. What do you mean? Oh, I mean large. Maybe that's a bit circular. But apart from that particular problem, what lies behind this, and you can find this in the literature frequently, is that big data is defined in terms of small computers. We just don't have enough power. That's why they are a problem. Surely not. First of all, big and small is a relational issue. A horse is a big animal, although the whale doesn't think so. Okay? So it depends on what perspective you adopt. Secondly, if that were the problem, then all we would have to do is to acquire more computers, and the problem will be solved. Of course, more computers generate more data. So it's not quite right to say, well, big data are a problem because we have small computers. There is something else. The something else that I want to illustrate first is with this particular picture. The problem with big data is small patterns. there's a bit of a catchphrase, but at least I hope it will stay in your mind. Big data, small patterns. That is the difficulty. Because if you don't capture the small patterns, then your competitor will get there first. Your terrorist will get there, full stop. And so your BlackBerry will be worthless. Okay? Yahoo will not sell. So the fact is that we need a lot of points and data points in order to see the pattern. The more data points you have, the better the pattern. And unless you, connect all the dots, you don't see the telephone. And my wife said, "Are you sure everybody will see that as a telephone?" So, yeah, unless they are very young students. So the point with the big data is that you need lots of them to make sure that those tiny little patterns of real value become emergent. And you don't have to believe me. Now, you can believe the American general. I found this quote from General Keith Alexander, who was the former director of the by now rather infamous NSA, and it's beautiful. I mean, you need a haystack to find it, and that's exactly what it is. You need a massive amount of data to be able to find that little thread which makes a difference in your business, in your military operation, or safety, security, in your educational efforts, as I will show you later. Now, this is why big data have an epistemological problem. How do I find the tiny little thread? 4 difficulties here. First, small patterns may be utterly insignificant. It is true that half of your data is junk. You just don't know which half. Now, that's a famous quote from advertisement. Half the money you throw to advertisement is complete junk. You just don't know which half, so you keep throwing money at it. Sainsbury's saves everything they can. They don't know whether, all these terabytes of stuff, gigabytes and humongous bytes will actually be useful one day. And just in case, you just don't know which one will be significant or not. So how these small patterns can be significant, that's the first issue. There are 3 more. Small patterns may be significant only if you aggregate, combine, put them together, listen in one row. Unless you do that, they're just data points. Unless you draw all those lines, that's not a telephone. Now, why is this important? Well, because is a very famous example. You must have already heard about this. If you haven't, it will come as a big surprise. But it's kind of the Mona Lisa of aggregation. Okay, as Target is an American retailer, they have designed a way of identifying the pregnancy stage of an individual by looking at 25 products. It's so precise that they can tell at which stage you are. Not just that whether you are or you are not, but they can tell you how many months. And of course, something went wrong because what they do, or what they did, they've changed the policy. They used to send coupons to the newly pregnant individual, woman. In a particular case, the woman in question was a young woman who had informed the family. The father called, complained to the service, and in the end he had to apologize because the young lady was pregnant. So the test was correct, it's just that she hadn't said anything about it. So of course, not in car shopping, suggests that everything of that requires aggregation. And of course you have to correlate the data. It's not enough that it's significant or insignificant, it has to put together, but you also have to make sure that the variables make sense. This is actually my wife and I. My wife's from Brazil, who were allegedly, according to HSBC, using the same credit card physically in Rio de Janeiro and in Oxford at the same time. Of course, it had been cloned. Of course, they were stealing money by the bucket, by the day. We were reimbursed completely because HSBC could not correlate that you cannot be in 2 places at the same time with the same card, same day, especially if it's not just London, Oxford, but Rio de Janeiro, Oxford. They immediately apologized, reimbursed the whole thing. That's why small data and small patterns are significant. And finally, that's the nightmare of anyone in big data. The trouble is that small patterns are significant also when they are not there. Now, what does that mean? It means that, that's a classic case of Sherlock Holmes, discovers, sort of solves the problem in this particular case because the dog did not bark. And he did not bark because whoever was approaching the house was a friend, and therefore. So it was the absence of a particular piece of information that should have been there but wasn't that made a difference. And that's why small patterns, unfortunately, can be very significant in your immense database because they are not there. Now that is, in any anti-terrorist countermeasure, not a joke. If your database doesn't contain something in particular, that is a problem. It's just that you don't know what it doesn't contain. Catch-22. And that's why you need a big brain to think out of the box what it should have contained and it didn't, and why there was significant exception. So this is the problem that we generally face when talking about the epistemology of big data. To summarize, we saw the 3B and we saw one thing. Big data, small patterns, lots of issues. So what's the ethical problem with big data, small patterns? In order to do all those fancy things, when we start digging or fracking big data, because you need a lot of them and you need huge quantities, then sometimes it's hard to respect the sensitivity of those data. If you want to discover small patterns, well, you need to be pretty aggressive and thorough with your data. So you need increasingly powerful tools, huge database, the procedures become invasive, and respect for the sensitivity of the identified small patterns goes out of the window. Now, I'm not justifying, therefore, ethically speaking, whoever makes the mistakes, but I'm saying mistakes are made for a reason. It's not that just people that they love to make a mess. It's, as I said, comparable to fracking. The mess that is caused is there for a reason, economic and questionable, but it's not just out of a sheer desire to make a mess around. So the ethical problem, big data, small patterns, is that the small patterns are sensitive patterns sometimes. So the small patterns that we want to identify may cause disruption in the lives of individuals. Now this brings with itself all problems that we have had already for decades in the sort of general computer science, IT sort of, environment. We have all data-related problems: privacy, ownership, usability. The list is long. But there are also new problems caused by these small patterns, sensitive patterns view, and I'm going to show you some of them soon. In order to understand them, I know it's after lunch and the request will come as unfair, but we need to check a little bit of the physics of computation. The gentleman here is Richard Feynman. If you haven't read anything by him, novel for physics, he writes beautifully and sometimes accessibly. So there are a couple of books, Penguin, by him, that are absolutely an intellectual delight. In a book called The Character of Physical Law, which is supposed to be one of those accessible books, almost, he writes, you will see the point in a moment, he takes a computing machine, your nice laptop in front of you, an infinite number of logical operations. When people like this write infinite, they mean infinite. There's like no loads. As in, there is not enough time in the universe to run these operations. To figure out what goes on in no matter how tiny space, regional space, and no matter how tiny a regional time. So pick up the smallest amount of time you can think of, and the smallest amount of space you can think of. Make it really a tiny, tiny little thing. And there is not enough time in the universe for any machine to tell you what goes on in that tiny space-time point. That's the complexity of the universe. Now, we can believe the gentleman in question, he knows his physics, and in fact nobody questions that point. What happens when that tiny little point is actually Alice's mind? Of course, our computers cannot compute what goes on in her mind. If it is not possible for a tiny little particle, a speck in a fraction of a second, how much more complex is an individual, a human being? So it takes a computing machine and a number of logical operations to figure out what goes on in the mind of a human individual. Their preferences, wishes, choices, tastes, behavior, beliefs, relations, plans, decisions. Impossible. Like, as in, you can't run faster than light. Impossible. The universe is not made that way. So, what do we do? I mean, what's the compromise? The compromise is that we need to transform that Alice into this Alice. We need proxies. And if any time was a proxy culture, this is the one. We live in a proxy culture. You don't check the restaurant, you check the website which says which restaurants are good restaurants. And they do that by proxy, etc. You don't fly somewhere, you check through other variables the quality and value of other things. Now in a proxy culture, what happens to Alice? Well, because she, the young lady behind, is informationally inexhaustible, I mean it's more than you can possibly compute in a whole life of the universe. You abstract, generalize, aggregate, interpolate, group together, classify, you do all those fancy things that data allows, so that instead of talking about her, you talk about her as a young woman with a college degree, some vocational needs, overqualified, is a student. It's not Alice, it's that kind of individual. And this is classic standard, and that's not too bad, that's okay. It's just that the problem becomes that with big data and small patterns, you start treating individuals as types, not tokens. A type, a certain kind of individual. And that comes with an inevitable loss of respect for the uniqueness of the token. It's just that sort of student, or that sort of teacher, or that sort of customer, etc. So it's a bit of a paradox, but in order to tailor all your interactions, in our case, in this particular context, but that is a wider point, as an educator, your services, your products, your education to Alice, the one behind you who has disappeared, you have to profile Alice and actually talk about this Alice. That dialectic is inescapable. So what we have here is, of course, some risks. It's a bit of a catchphrase, but the idea is quite simple. The profile, the Alice who has disappeared, the real woman, becomes the profile, this fancy picture. And the profile becomes predictable. That's why we decided to use this as a proxy for her. This is computable, she is not. So this becomes predictable, but the predictable is easily transformed into the exploitable. If you can predict me as a customer at Sainsbury, I can use you. Now I can actually send you certain kind of things because you are the guy who on Sunday buys that particular beer, I don't drink beer, because there is that particular sport event and he likes to eat those particular popcorns, etc. So what we need here, of course, is care for the sensitive small patterns connected to the big data because of this particular dialectic. The questions that arise here are quite straightforward. Now, do we really need to extract such patterns? Why are they needed in the first place? Who owns them? Are they sensitive in the first place? Now remember, I mean, some of my colleagues sometimes get really obsessed about privacy, but according to even the Geneva Convention, you can provide some information to your worst enemy. So there is a bit of information that you can definitely share. Now, it's not true that all information needs to be fully protected by privacy. However, why and when, that is an open question. How they're going to be used, what effects they have on people. I mean, you know these questions very well. So these are just a reminder of what lies behind these sensitive patterns that we're talking about. What I want to call your attention is to the new issues, because this, basically we have inherited them as a block from the past. There are some new problems here, and I will then move towards the specific case in question so that we can work on an applied context. Some of the new problems concern, they are upstream, before everything happens. How are you going to repurpose the data and the consent? This has become immense, especially in medical context. I understand, although I'm happy to receive more information about this, there's also a big issue in educational context, anonymization, etc. as you probably know, but if you don't, I'll have to share this with you. It takes only 3 data points to identify an individual. So much for anonymization. Okay? So anonymization is there to make sure that if you don't want to see it, you don't see it. It's not there to make sure that if you want to see it, you don't. Are you with me? So if I'm a researcher and I don't want to know who you are, anonymization is there for me, so I don't have to see it. But if I'm someone who wants to know who you are, the anonymization is not going to withstand my attempts. That's the trouble at the moment. And downstream, people shouldn't be treated, but this is a typical Kantian philosophy, as means, resources, times, targets, and therefore just this sort of student, customer, consumer, citizen, potential terrorist, and so on. But this is only a so-called in ethics regulative ideal. You can't implement it. It's more like a place where you want to go and walk towards, and any step in that direction is a good step. But it doesn't mean, therefore, that we can get there in absolute terms. And I said I'm walking now closely to the end of this third part, the ethics. So we saw the 3B and the data as big data as small patterns. That's the epistemological problem. The ethics problem is about the sensitive nature of these small patterns. I want to spend a bit more time on a particular case because nothing better than have some real feet on the ground than to sort of anchor all this analysis to something concrete. Before that, a general principle that we are currently discussing in Brussels with, I have to say, different views about the value of this position. I recommended recently to people in Brussels and some big corporate agents like Microsoft that the ethical value of the data, imagine you in the box, that the box around you, the data that concern you, should not be that value higher than the ethical value of the someone or something about which the data are. It's like having a whole profile and the individual. It would be absurd to have a legislation that protects the data more than the individual. Surely, at least as much as, and possibly in some cases less than, but it can't be more than. I mean, ultimately we care about the real Alice, not the data about Alice, as much as. So this, which seems to be going well with some sort of corporate agents and with some political agents, could be at least a way forward in dealing with some of the problems that I'm going to tell you more in the next slides. And here is warming up to the actual problem. And as you know, when we come to problems, legislation is what bites sometimes very deeply. There's something called the General Data Protection Regulation, which is under discussion, and if you haven't encountered it, good for you, because it's deadly boring, but this is what is going to affect anyone living in the European Union in the following years, as far as the data are concerned. People in this country included, unless the government will manage to get us dislodged from Europe once and for all. This data protection regulation contains 2 particular derogations. The derogations affect Articles 81 and 83. So who cares about these details? Well, it's too much. But, well, it's crucial. It's crucial for what you are doing with the journal, because these articles and the derogations means that you can use personal data for historical, statistical, and scientific research purposes without having to ask for the consent of the participants again every time you will use the data. Surely that's not a big deal. It's immense. Because medical research runs on millions of individuals giving consent about, say, cancer or obesity and if you have to contact millions of people every time a single lab around the corner has to run a new experiment, you just don't run the experiment. You don't have the resources to do it. So this starts getting a little bit of an issue. You have a legislation which tells you something that is doable. the derogations are fine. What I would like to argue is that they are ethical sound. They recognize that we have a moral sort of duty to improve human lives. And that applies not just to the medical side, but to the educational side as well. If someone has given her or his consent to have his or her data used black, it's like, yes, I can't care anymore. Just go, do it. No. Why should I be forced to go back again and again, asking, well, we're going to use it for, no, the impact of this technology. Oh no, sure, the technology has changed, we're going to reuse it. That would be pointless, a waste of time, and will probably make a lot of research not do it. So the data protection regulation at the moment strikes an appropriate balance between protecting the rights and interests of individuals, remember, Alice, and using personal data as means to facilitate scientific research for public good. So that what we have is protection of data, but not more than protection of the individuals we are affecting. We want to make sure that future generations will benefit from our efforts today. There has to be a way of finding the right balance between these two things. Now, why is this worth emphasis? Well, because things have gone wrong recently. And that's the specific ethical problem I'd like to discuss with you today. If you put together big data, open data, as in government open data, and data protection, and as we have seen, the legislation, well, they all focus on individual privacy. It's Alice, it's Bob, it's Mary and Peter. Yeah. So, well, as you will see in a moment, that is a difficulty. What we need to understand, as I said a moment ago, is how to, in this particular ground-based example, how we can protect the individual while benefiting future generations. So how can we basically put together privacy protected while taking advantage of the great potentialities we have seen before, for big data, smart application, etc. And this tension is not political, as you have probably read several times in newspapers. What you normally find is security, political issue, versus protection of individual liberties, ethics. Oh, is either politics or ethics, which comes first? Wrong. The politics is based on an ethics, and it's ethics of welfare. So the contrast is unfortunately deeper, is between two ethical demands. Improving human lives while protecting what you have. It's cake and eating kind of problem. And at least it's clear, even if more difficult. But in this context, as I said, the kind of moral duties to be reconciled are safeguarding individual rights, let's say all participants to a particular educational experiment, while improving future generations' welfare. So the education of big data in this case, protection of personal records, and improvement of educational standards. How can we put these two things together? Well, remember the legislation before and what I told you about being concerned about Alice. If you Google respect for groups' privacy, that's what you get. At least that's what you got a few days ago. That might have changed recently. This, as you know, it never happens with Google. When was the last time you actually put something there and you didn't get any result? As in, sorry, nobody's ever used the phrase respect for groups' privacy. But that's what it is. Nobody has used that particular phrase because we have, philosophically speaking, a classic ontological framework. In other words, a classic way of understanding what the world is like. And the world is beneficiaries of the exercise of the two moral duties, remember, welfare and protection of data, are individuals versus society. It's Alice versus, say, the whole society to which she belongs. What we are missing in the middle are the groups. Now, I hope a couple of things are clicking here. Remember what we said about the small particle in a small amount of time being not computable, and therefore making sure that we don't treat Alice as such. We treat Alice as a type, not as a token. Therefore, as a member of a group, never as Alice herself. Nobody cares about Alice Smith. Everybody cares about Alice as belonging to their customer generation or to that group of students. So when the legislation misses that central part, the group is missing exactly the place where the technology is working. We're not working on the individual, you cannot, We're not working on the whole society, you cannot. If anyone from the Ministry of Defense to Sainsbury, to the school down the road, is working on Alice, is working on Alice as part of a group. The legislation is protecting either society or individuals, not the groups in the middle, and that is an issue. Here is a definition that comes from, again, European legislation on protection of personal data. A data subject, what is it? What does it look like? An identified or identifiable person, okay, it's not the group in this room, to whom specific personal data relates. It is someone, emphasis or added, but they're all there, etc. Who can be identified, direct or indirect, in particular reference to the application number, etc. Psychological, mental, you take the picture. The picture is that we are concerned about Alice and Bob and Mary and Peter. And we think that as long as we take care of Alice and Bob and Peter and Mary, anything else will take care of itself. The group doesn't require attention because you take care of each individual within the group. Very wrong. There are 5, at least, related problems to group privacy. And I said this, I hope you find it sufficiently interesting in terms of a specific application of the 3 general frameworks that I provided before. The 3V for data, what big data are, small patterns, and sensitive patterns. So I'm just showing you a particular application, but there are many others. It's group privacy. We haven't thought about that because there was no need in the past. What we had inherited from the old money issues when we're dealing with big data never dealt with groups. But can groups hold rights? If yes, can they have a right to privacy as a group? And when does a group qualify as a privacy group as such? And if you think, I'll tell you more about all this, but if you think about, does that really relate to me? As a teacher, formerly, just think about that particular group in the class. Those who were sitting in the corner, or wearing a particular kind of garment, or belonging to a specific kind of group, religious group, or ethnic group, and how is the group privacy related to the individual's privacy? I mean, how do they interlock? And does respect for individual's privacy require respect for the privacy of the group to which the individual belongs? Now, these are lively issues that, unless you start dealing with them, they will cause serious problems, as I will indicate forcefully, really forcefully, in a moment. So, question 1 and 2, well, privacy as a group right is understood in the literature as a right held by the group as a group, not by all its members in particular. It's something like self-determination, for example. If you have self-determination as a right, that belongs to the group, not to me and you. It's because we are that particular group, or that, for example, nation, that we have a right to self-determine our future. So the literature is quite non-ambiguous about it. Of course, groups can have rights, certain kind of rights. It's perhaps unclear whether they can have a right to privacy. So there's a corporate group, nothing to do with Google, as in understanding groups as a body of individual. And in this case, the group is a single and unitary whole. It's like treating the group as if you were a someone, and it's that special social someone that has a privacy which then can be analyzed as in similar ways as Alice's privacy. If Alice, say, belongs to a particular group of self-referential, so Italian students in college, well, that group has privacy as if it were an individual. Or, again, on the literature, you have a collective group position. The group's privacy is actually shared or joined by all its individuals. It's like having, as a group, £10,000 because each of us has £1. So the privacy question becomes not just a mere application of privacies, but it makes more because you can buy something with £10,000 that none of us could actually buy by going there, paying £1. So in this case, the privacy of the group is considered as their privacy rather than its privacy. And for number 5, well, this is where what I said before I hope helps in terms of framework. from education to health-related issues, we target, for good or bad reasons, we target groups. So individuals can be targeted as members of a specific group, especially if you have big and open data. And this is more likely just because, in general, we treat types and not tokens. So the danger is that you can actually protect 100% the privacy of the individual and yet destroy the life of that individual insofar as that individual belongs to a group and you target the privacy of that group without any consequences. And since all this may still sound a little bit too philosophical, here is a down the road sad example. For the more optimistic among us, it's a great lesson. This is something that Orange ran recently in Côte d'Ivoire. Orange is the French side of the corporate agent. Orange France is the main mobile operator in Côte d'Ivoire. And they had a wonderful, on paper, a wonderful idea. I mean, as in really nice. They decided we have all this massive amount of mobile phone data. How many people are calling how many other people, where, when, what for. There's lots of metadata and so on. Position of people, where they are, movements and so on. So the original data set contains 2.5 billion records. That's quite a wealth of material that you can start looking into to find those tiny little subtle patterns. And for about 5 million users, they were anonymized. So what's the problem? You can't find Alice in the group. There is no Bob. It's just millions of people and millions of messages. So what they did was to do this for to put this as available to researchers for non-profit reasons, and researchers could apply and get clearance to use this data for research purposes. What they did not do was to clarify a fundamental point, which is clear in the next slide. A fundamental point which became clear after a while. The data collection took place in Côte d'Ivoire over a 5-month period, December 2011, April 2012. Listen to the BBC news. Does that ring a bell? That was the situation in Côte d'Ivoire in those months. It was civil war. The UN was there to make sure that ethnic and political parties wouldn't kill each other at a level that we are probably going to re-experience again in Ukraine. And just in case we thought that we Europeans were part of this kind of nasty aspects of humanity. But we know what happens when civil war takes place in a country. You don't care about Alice. You care about that group. You want to kill the whole group, whoever they are, individually. If you know that that group is going to collect somewhere, if that group always goes to a synagogue, or always goes to that particular church, or is always buying in that stuff in that market, well, that's where you're going to put the bombs. And who cares whether it's Alice, Bob, or everybody else? So this is not the problem that we have with group's privacy. You don't protect the group's privacy, you don't think about it, the individuals may actually suffer because we don't care about the individual. This is a bit of legislation that you want to have just in front of you. You don't have to read it, just to know that if you read it back up, this is what we are discussing currently for the data protection legislation in Europe, and it's all about individuals. It's the past, this is the 1995 legislation, and again, just so that you have the text in front of you, is the new legislation that is being discussed. There is no group privacy in view. Now, for a continent that boasts some of the strongest and most enlightened laws on data protection, this is a big gap. It's a big gap because we haven't seen the framework correct. So, back to our question, and I'm almost through with my presentation. Number 5. What's the point about Alice and the group? Well, we have treated, in military terminology, Alice often as a so-called high-value target. Imagine the headquarters of an army. That's that in military appearance the high-value target, when in fact she is a high-payoff target. It's like a tag in a column of tanks. You want to destroy the whole column. You don't care whether the tank number 1 comes after or before tank number 2. It's Alice anyway. You want to take care of all the Alices in that group. So what we are currently doing is underestimating the risk involved in opening anonymized lessons out of public use, because groups of people may still be easily identified and targeted as a group, from education to military applications, from social down the road applications in the county to medical applications. The trouble is, and that comes as a bit of a moment of humbleness for all of us, is that there are very few Moby Dicks. We treat each other as if we were. We think of ourselves as if each of us was a Moby Dick, but we're not. What we are is really a lot of sardines. Most of us are just part of our whole shop, and is that is being targeted again and again and again, for good and bad reasons, by all agents around us. Unless you take care of the shop, it is the shop that needs to be protected, then the sardine cannot be saved. If we think in terms of Moby Dicks, we are mis-targeting the kind of legislation that needs to be in place for the protection of the data of the individual. So that is the end of the particular example. As I said, this is a straightforward application of some of the things that are told in terms of general framework about what big data are, the big data as small patterns, why small patterns bring about this typology rather than tokenology of analysis, why that causes sensitive problems because the data in question can actually be used, and why, going back to group versus individual, there are concrete cases down the road that are going to cause real headaches. As a conclusion, I think we started with a bit of philosophy, so I may as well end with a bit of philosophy. This is from Plato, Cratius, good guy, and he wrote a long time ago, about 25 centuries ago. Who is the knower? Someone who knows. And someone who knows is someone who knows how to ask and answer, I add, the right questions. And that right there means several things. It means you need to be able to ask the right questions because the big data are there, but they don't, no matter what they say in the newspapers, they don't speak by themselves. You need smart people to interrogate those data, otherwise the small patterns will not emerge. But you also need the right question, not just epistemologically, but also ethically, because depending on the questions that we're going to ask about the ethical impact of big data, we're going to find or not the right solutions for the future applications. And with this, I hope, more optimistic note, I'm ready for some questions and answers. Thank you.
Yes, that's kind of where you start, isn't it?
So it's just to say that some of the things I've told you are in this forthcoming book. This is sheer advertisement. It's very cheap, so I thought it could be there.
Questions, ladies and gentlemen?
I've got a question.
Oh, please.
I was very interested in the nature of the groups that you were referring to and the need to protect the group as well as to protect the individual. I'm also interested in the transient nature of some groups that might come together for a short period of time. How would it be possible to apply some ethical regulation to groups like that? So, for example, I was thinking of the Liverpool football fans that were in the stadium in Sheffield. They were a group that came together almost haphazardly to support the team. Something terrible happened, but they're still regarded as a group. There's a lot of information about them. Is the transiency of a group an issue that needs to be dealt with as well?
You put your finger on one of the really painful issues here. Because these groups are dynamic, I provided some simple examples where ethnicity, for example, counts, or religious affiliation, or say sexual orientations. Those no matter how complicated they look, they are easier to deal with because at least people, well, they stay sufficiently stable in that group. That they may change their religion, they may change their sexual orientation, but more or less, I mean, it's. But what you just pointed out, this dynamic nature of aggregating and re-aggregating people, it's. As you can tell, I don't have an answer. I mean, it's terribly difficult. There are two comments which are not an answer to your question. The comment number one is that that is typical of our society. There's a dynamic nature of groups coming together or not. And we can see this on the political sphere. I mean, most of the work of a politician today is to make sure that there are points of aggregation for people to come together and then disappear again. So that is definitely a feature that we need to deal with because it's not going to go. I mean, it's part of our dynamic nature of our society. So it is important, and we can't just say, okay, we don't look at it for another 10 days, it won't be there anymore. So it's going to be there, and it's going to rotten as we speak. So that's the first comment. The second comment is that, unfortunately, not only, as you said, some groups, they come together dynamically, almost spontaneously by themselves, but the big data operators, they create the groups. Now, if you are working for a big corporate entity, they will sort of slice this big data in terms of owners of cats who drive a Volkswagen. All of a sudden, I am someone who, no, I don't drive it, but suppose Alice becomes someone who owns a cat and drives a Volkswagen, and she belongs to that group. And that group is completely artificial, but that group can be targeted. So, not only I don't have an answer, but I think it's a problem that needs to be analyzed more in depth.
So you could also end up being part of a group and not know about it.
Oh no, that goes without saying. I mean, exactly. That is the problem that we have seen in the past. For example, you go to the bank, classic, textbook material, chapter 1. Go to the bank, ask for a mortgage denied because you belong to that group. Which group? You didn't pay your bill when you were an undergraduate student of your telephone. So exactly, as you said, those groups not only they are dynamic. Not only they're created by the entities in question, but they're not even transparent. It's not like I know that I belong to that group. I know that I belong to many groups, that I have a card in my pocket as a membership. But God knows, or big data knows, what they're doing with my entity as not sliced up in so many different ways. This is work for philosophers. That's the only thing I can say.
Is there possibly a significant difference, though, between the kind of group that you autonomously choose to become part of and the second kind of group, which I'm tempted to say, well, that's not really a group, that's a kind of categorization. It's happening behind your back.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas membership of a group could be argued to imply some sort of choice, some sort of agency.
Well, that is fine as far as the individual's choices and decisions are concerned. But when it comes to the other side, the targeting, the targeting entity doesn't discriminate whether you choose to be there at that moment as a member of their, say, fan club. I'm going to bomb those people. You are one of them, it's your problem, not mine. And if you want to, as a philosopher, I'm happy to go fine with the ontological distinction between membership, chosen or chosen consent of men, or not. But that is, as it were, on this side of the wall, it doesn't address the issue that saw a moment ago. So it's a good point. I agree with you. But I fear what happens on the other side.
I really liked what you were saying about the group and the importance of those rights and noticing the level of privacy of the group. But just partly because of the last point, but actually in general, I wanted to take you back to what I thought was a very interesting analysis of the sensitivity of the small patterns, to take you back to a level of granularity which is at the level of the individual. Because although I absolutely respect and understand what you're saying about sardines and bigger entities and how we assume too much for ourselves, nevertheless, I think at the level of human dignity, it is at the level of the individual, and actually all the groups are always made up of those. So I wanted to take you back to that in terms of how we protect that in the era of big data. How do we go back to the original Alice and actually ensure that her needs are taken care of
So, a clarification first, just in case my message was wrongly delivered. By providing that example, and I really meant that just as an example, I did not mean in any possible way that replaces other problems. Unfortunately, that's classic philosophy for you. We just increased the number of problems. So we just had more. I appreciate your point.
Yeah, absolutely understand that. Yeah.
We absolutely have, and it stays with us, the problem of individual privacy.
Yes.
So far from me to say, oh, European legislation, oh, legislation, forget about it. What we really should care about, no, absolutely. I mean, it's like saying, no, that's the first brick in the wall. It's just that it's a big wall, and there are many other bricks. And one of them is this. Now, back to what you were saying. I mean, how do we protect the individual privacy? One more comment. I'm probably the wrong source for this specific message, given my age and the white hair. But there is a sense in which our sense of privacy is changing, changing as historically changing. And I'm not making the wrong, factually and silly, conceptually point about new generation, they don't have a sense of privacy. That's rubbish. Come to the Oxford Internet Institute, we have plenty of data to back up what I'm saying. Young generation, they care a lot about their privacy. It's just they care a lot about their privacy differently. And that is the difficulty. It's not just yes, no, it's not black and white. So the comment coming short, short answer is there is something to be said about understanding the problem in the first place. Because we are appreciating what privacy means today slightly differently from what we were understanding in the past. That doesn't solve the problem again. And in terms of individual privacy, I personally have, on a personal basis, more philosophically as well, I have set quite strong views about what that requires. I mean, it seems to me that privacy, just really entering into a personal philosophy kind of chapter, but privacy should really be seen as constitutive of the individual. Now this belongs to more the 21st century philosophy, but there's some data that constitute the individual for what he or she is, and some data that just couldn't care less. Now, where you draw the distinction, my name, for example, does not constitute me. That was accidentally given to me by my parents. There are some memories and some things that I share, say, only with my wife, that constitute me. Those are absolutely untouchable. Not my date of birth. That is also in the public domain. That's also not something that constitutes me. So where you draw the line between constitutive data that make you who you are intrinsically as an entity, versus data that are slapped onto you as could be a label that born in that place at that day with that name. Well, that is where you start working the difference, seems to me. Well, what I've just said in the last 2 minutes is hugely controversial. So I'm reluctant to go into this because I will be selling you something that lots of my colleagues think is rather insane. This idea that data constitutes the individual, we look at normally information as something that is on top of a special something. And it's like having a glass and the water inside the glass. The data are something that belong to the individual, but they don't make the individual. It takes a long detour through metaphysics to understand the individual as being considered by data, and therefore developing a different kind of theory of privacy. But for that, I have a beautiful book. That's the answer. It's called The Ethics of Information, and that is unreadable. Trust me. 400 pages, Oxford University Press, this big. Only those who dare.
Yeah, thank you very much for interesting talk. Yeah, so, but I would still go back to this problem of agency and membership. Yeah, so as you said in the nation. Yeah, so the self-determination is a property of the group, yeah, of the nation. Yeah, but because the members of the nation know that they are members of the nation. And in the case of this attribution as a group by the enemy, yeah, so which was called also categorization, yeah, so there is no agency, and they have the opposite of it. It's a patienthood. Yeah. So and somehow it reminds me of the Kafka situation. Yeah. So you are guilty for something you are not aware what you have done. Yeah. So and do not see here any solution for the problem. Yeah. So to state, yeah, so that we all suffering from actions of others. Yeah. So it's perhaps it's a correct description of the state of the world. Yeah. But what is the solution for this agency and membership problem?
Let me try Let me try to show you a practical solution with that practical issue, so that we know that it's not just a philosophical paradox, something that once you have appreciated, there is no solution anywhere. Now let's go back to Côte d'Ivoire and those data. Those data were considered to be safe because each individual point had been anonymized. Now what was, and I'm now talking on record without knowing the actual database, so I just speculating in terms of an example. If it is not this particular case, apply to any other case. What you need to be able to do is to block the possibility of correlating data at a group level. Now that is perfectly doable. I mean, imagine good old days when you could go to the library and every day you could take only one book and only that book, and if you go to the library again next day, you have to return the book before and get another book. Now that is a pain in the neck, but surely it doesn't allow for easy comparisons of books. Now imagine you do the same with these data points. What you can do is to collect the data points, but you cannot run, as it were, correlations so easily. Now that, for example, would be a strategy towards dealing with the group protection. I'm saying this is just an example, a very toy example, because it comes, now we discussed this already, I mean, with medical research at the European level. This is exactly what you shouldn't be able to implement. Because if you do that, you want to have this, say, 5 million people with a particular genome, and you want to dig out of that some features. Well, you need to be able to run those comparisons. You really need exactly this particular ability to say, well, no, all this group correlates to all these features, and vice versa. So it is not like off-the-shelf solution. No, just don't allow this. No, make it illegal or make it impossible technically. Ethics by design, for example, or by law. You can still do it, but if you do it, we'll put you in prison if we find you. Now that is not, again, a straightforward elementary solution. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The solution is to start thinking that is a problem and start looking at the potential design, either legally or technologically, that can solve the problem. I wouldn't be so pessimistic in terms of say, nothing can be done. Tough luck. There are things that can be done. It's just that, again, it has to be tailored to the particular applications and so on. Now, the case that I just reported about Orange France in Côte d'Ivoire, they just didn't think about it. It's not that they meant to allow this group discrimination, but they thought, well, we took care of the individuals, the rest is fine. If you do, for example, if you run the same experiments with, say, HIV, well, surely you want to think about who is going to have access to their database, and can they really reconstruct the population in London who has HIV, or maybe not. It doesn't take a genius to see what damage could be done and why their protection should be in place. And sometimes it can be a trigger thing, not just not only those researchers with their clearance. I don't want to make it too much of a fancy sort of science fiction scenario, and I don't want to deny the possibility that the bad guys, they will still find a way of being bad guys. It's just that you know when something is being done in the wrong way, and you can take measures. So I will be a little bit more optimistic in terms of what can be done, surely at the level of legislation. Because if there's not even a point in the legislation in terms of that will be a crime if you do it, well, that's free Far West for anyone. So maybe human ingenuity has solved more difficult problems. We can get there. We just have to, first of all, realize it's a problem, and second, start thinking about a solution. Maybe?
No, I'm very well with you because I'm a computer scientist, and so I would say
we can find a solution.
technical solution, as you say. Yeah? So,
For example.
but you also mentioned ideological solutions. Yeah? So.
Well, no, I didn't mention ideological. I'm a philosopher. I'm careful about words. I would never mention ideology in this context. I meant legal.
Okay.
And by legal, I mean you have a piece of legislation that says groups cannot be targeted. It's oversimplifying. You know, the legislation is going to be terribly more complex. But the single message is you don't target individuals, you don't target the group to that of that individual either. Because if you target all Muslims in London, well, that is a problem. And we want to have that spelled out in the legislation as clearly as possible. That doesn't seem to me asking too much. Implementation, how the jury is going to go about it, well, that's a messy world. At least we know somehow the path. There were cases when I was younger in my college, when I was at Walton, where you just couldn't check your email from the library. The librarian had made sure that you had plenty of computers, plenty of catalogs, you could browse the web in all possible ways, but you could not use that for your email. So of course, you wanted to make sure that anyone had access to those computers more sort of quickly and you couldn't spend 3 hours checking your art. What they had forgotten was that basically they had blocked everything, all the possible browsers. What they hadn't thought was that there was a browser for Chinese websites. And they hadn't thought that someone smart enough would actually open the browser for all in Chinese, which of course someone didn't mean anything, and Gmail, and bingo, you could actually check your email at the time. Now that is, for example, bad design. It's just an analogy. And if you have that sort of bug, people will exploit the bug. It's a bug in legislation I'm talking about. We need to find a way of patching up that. I hope.
I'm not a legal expert, but I mean, if you intentionally do harm to a particular group, even within EU legislation or scheme legislation, that you kind of discriminate groups based on sexuality or based on whatever. So, more from an education perspective, if you know that I'm just brainstorming, students with Asperger's syndrome struggle with, I'm just brainstorming, visualizations on the left and prefer reading it on the right, just say that that's the case, and then in terms of learning and design, be able to actually address those issues. Is that then wrong from your perspective? Because we know, we can categorize people who read more on the right hand of a website, might be Asperger, and I'm just brainstorming. Would you see that necessarily being wrong because you're helping that particular group to make better use of information?
I might have missed the point. I'm not completely sure because
I'm not really sure that if you're able to identify this group of fish and you're able to then actually do something about it to help it,
okay.
would that necessarily bad?
Let me give you another example. Let's see whether we can sort of dislodge a couple of intuitions here. We take for granted in Europe and in the States, especially in the States, group action at the legal level. I mean, it's not you, it's not me, it's a group action against, say, that particular corporate. So that is in the legislation already. So we assume that groups can be agents, as in not legal agents, that as a group they have a legal action. Why not having something similar? And then, again, I'm asking now the lawyer next door. Why not having something similar when the group can actually have that particular action in terms of privacy when it's on the receiving side? Saying, look, we as a group have seen our privacy disrupted or breached by this particular entity. We, with the Aspen Center, we have been targeted. And we as Aspen Syndrome group, not me, not you, as a group, we're moving a particular legal action against their service provider. I wouldn't see this as something outrageous, but at the moment, if we want to go back to the text, and I said this is the text that is going to affect, that's why I put it there. This is the old one, but this is the new text that is going to affect data protection in the European area. And this is the best we have. I'm not criticizing it. We're way better on this side of the Atlantic than our colleagues on the other side. But if you look at the principle of protection should apply to any information contains an identified or identifiable natural person. That blocks any possible legal action by a group. End of story. A group with Aspen syndrome, in terms of protection of privacy, cannot use that text to say, look, we don't like this. Now, it might be open to the court to say, no, it was wrong, it was not a group. We have lots of other issues. But at the moment, we're just blocking the road to any group action on their side. Now, don't forget, this was a particular example that I provided for a general some set of issues. We allow them.
Yeah, but then again, yeah. So now you're describing this group again with agency. Yeah. So they because they can do a class or group action because they are feeling as a member of the group. Yeah. So and then they are taking actions. Yeah. And then one of these members can also act. Yeah, as a proxy for all the others. Yeah. So because if this is decided on the court, yeah, so this has to be applied on every member of the group, yeah, because of the principle of justification or which, justice. Yeah. So and I think that is something completely different than to these other groups, yeah, which are categorized by other people. Yeah. So and I do not see how you can escape this gap. Yeah. So between yeah, so the stereotypic definition of membership, yeah, which only comes from this data. And from really a decision, yeah? So an active decision of somebody who said, I'm a member of a group, yeah? I'm a member of this family, I'm a member of this community, I'm a member of this state. Yeah? So,
let me try a more constructive maneuver. What you're just saying could be absolutely fantastic in a debate about group practice. The discussion we're having, we're not having it at the moment in Brussels. What I'm inviting you to do is to have this discussion. You think one way, I think the other way, we're still discussing group privacy. You think, well, it's possible, only in some cases, the membership and others, no, maybe not. But this kind of discussion, so if we step out of the problem, the discussion about group privacy should take place. And perhaps you're right, perhaps it's very difficult to identify. Perhaps in most cases we can't work it out. Perhaps we can even conclude that, look, you know what, that's the best we can do. The point I'm making is that what we have at the moment is not the result of a reflection on what has been considered possible, it's just the default position. We just think that privacy, individual privacy. We never think about groups. So maybe a way forward is to say, well, yeah, let's have a discussion. I still believe that you're confusing two things, but that's a philosopher talking about a computer scientist. It's important to understand what, talking to a computer scientist, what the level of abstraction is. If we want to, there's no such thing as, in and of itself, a group, end of the story. You understand a group in a particular way. What's the particular way? One way is to say membership. Willful participation and subscription, say, to the values or fine. That's one way of describing a group. The other one, which is equally fine, is to say where someone treats all the people in this room as a group. But we're not. So well, tough luck. Someone out there decided that anyone in this room is a member, and that's the end of the story. Now, who says who is right and who is not? Well, it depends on why we're asking the question in the first place. So what's the question behind the analysis of which way you should be model a group? And if the question is, well, because, for example, we want to bring coffee to anyone in this room, well, you better treat us as a group. But if the question is, because we want to know whether they belong to the same university, well, are you saying they come from all over the place? So what was the question that determined the modeling of that particular entity? Determines the answer. And yes, it is a group. No, it isn't. There's no such thing as it is, it isn't, outside the level analysis. So I completely agree with you that there are level analysis in which groups require some parameters and level of analysis in which those parameters have to be different. The point that I'm making is a step before, is let's have this conversation because it seems to be important, because that's where our society, proxy society, society that classifies all of us as types, not tokens, is out of the whole thing. Whole society, individual, is not working on the whole society and is not working on the individual. It's working right in the middle on the typology. And that's the space uncovered by our legislation. It seems to be a big gap that we should have this discussion about. So I would welcome the points that you're making. It seems to be important. That was my constructive attempt.
I wondered whether you think that there's any kind of resistance to this, because in a way it sort of just seems so naturally obvious on the one hand, but on the other, when you think of the history of groups in the world and in Europe and the dangers and political stuff associated with that and problems and persecutions and dilemmas and tribalism and whatever, I mean, whether it's conscious or not, do you think there's any kind of resistance which is occurring?
That's a very good point. I do not know. I think that we are opening up a Pandora's box here. It is, again, just in this particular case example, because once, and I agree with the colleague, once we start discussing what are and what are not, what count and what doesn't count as a group, and who has the right to raise a flag that says we have this particular privacy or not, etc., this is going to be a real sort of minefield. It is for historical reasons. All this is not a justification for not doing it. It's a clarification of why we may not have done it.
That's why I'm asking the question. Is we're sort of in a vacuum at the moment, talking as we should do, without reference to power and culture and politics and ideologies and histories and all that. But maybe there's something there which needs to be tackled through kind of bureaucratic legislative measures, that what you're saying, without specifying exactly what the resistance is, because it's probably multiple.
I completely agree, and I think it is a very thorny, difficult issue to deal with. But one consequence you could imagine immediately for just thinking about, together with the rest of the group, is what if group action in terms of privacy breach can be initiated only if you can prove that you're a member of that group? All of a sudden there are member cards all over the place. I have to bring with me trillions of membership cards, otherwise in case in which I would like to move. I'm sure that the scenario, it's incredibly complicated. It's just that that's the world in which we live. And so hiding behind the I don't say it, therefore it doesn't exist, sort of veil of ignorance, it just means that whoever wants to do it is doing it freely. There is no concern, there's not even a focus on that. And nothing happened in Cote d'Ivoire, luckily. If someone had actually used a database to target a particular ethnic group, we wouldn't, you would have heard of this, and this conversation would be much more trivial. So with other colleagues, this gets into academia, not nitty-gritty things. So we're organizing a particular research group on this topic, among many others. And one of the issues that we are also raising is that this is going to be an issue. It's going to explode sooner or later. If we think about it a little bit earlier, it will help. It's a shame when you start thinking about something, or it might actually explode, and you don't do anything about it.
Well, it's interesting because we were talking earlier about Sherlock Holmes's thing about the dog that doesn't bark. I mean, why is the dog silent?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a very interesting point. So this particular dog hasn't barked and hasn't been biting. My suspect is that it will, and there's something we could do before things go wrong. But I'm sure they've been saying this for a long while, and nobody listens, so it's okay.
Yeah, no, I just really enjoyed your talk. Before you came this morning, when you were we were talking about the sort of the care data issues, and I think we sort of moved away from the fact that an awful lot of positive stuff can come out of this sort of group typology. Identifying outcomes and being able to predict outcomes for health. Arguably things like the Salford Hospital, things like that would have been found a lot earlier if we've had this kind of group analyses going on. So I think that I don't think we need to. I think we need to remember that a lot of positive information can come out of this sort of grouping of individuals. But I agree. I think and I think the care data thing will happen. when people have got their act together. And I think coming out of that, we're going to start to get some of these issues whether people are prejudiced because they're part of a group, and there might be like a retrospective bit of information that's coming through then out of that sort of group analysis. But whether it's the analysis is then allowing for that information to come through rather than they're actually being targeted because they're part of that group now. So I don't know how that would fit into this sort of legislative framework.
Actually, well, thank you, because it also allows me to make explicit a concern that I have about this, which is, I know it sounds a bit preposterous, but actually I don't think that we're not going to take care of this. I think that there will be a backlash. What is going to happen, worst scenario, is that we're not going to solve it. A big, major mess will happen. The result will be a complete blackout, saying you can't do it, and we'll stop, never. Which is actually happening on the medical research side. The Wellcome Trust, which is around the corner, has issued very strong statements about ethical revisions of the data privacy legislation, because we have moved so far in favor of data protection that a lot of research will not be possible if that is going to take place. So my concern is, I don't know if that resonates with what you just said, but it's not so much that we're not going to do this, but that nothing happens. Big mess, overreaction, we won't be able to do anything. That's it, 1, 2, 3, 4. We see this all the time.
Exactly.
We see this again. Nuclear power in Germany. No, it's the same story again and again. Problem there, you don't do it. Big issue, overreaction. Never, don't do anything. Are you insane? I mean, this world is exploding. I mean, where do we get the energy from? That's a different story. But I think that if I have to bet on one scenario, is that this is a pot that is going to boom, and the overreaction, especially from Brussels, will be a blanket legislation saying nobody can do, say, group research at the medical research level in Europe. That's the end of research. So by preventing a problem to happen, I think we can actually make sure that the good things stay in place. Because we're running huge risks of water and baby altogether when the issues will explode. So again, I would be very sorry if anyone here would to think that the message is protect, don't do it, it's all bad. Quite a lot of my research has been recently funded by Google, just for the record. So you can see where I'm standing here. I'm just saying there's a huge amount of value that needs to get out of this if we take care of the problems in advance. Otherwise, the negative thinking will take place, and all there is just a fantastic excuse to block technology and say no, it's from bad to worse. So I think if I got your point correctly, I'm very much on your side.
Just a couple of points. Firstly, just coming back on this thing about, if you like, where's it all leading, what are the consequences? It seems to me that there's a malevolent story and a benevolent story. We're mostly interested in the benevolent story, so from the point of view of learning analytics and trying to help people to learn better, those kind of things are foremost in people's minds, I suppose, and the kind of objections, maybe we don't think about them that much in a practical sense because we're just kind of doing it. But I think it would be useful to know, okay then, to take it back to that kind of deontological level, given that there can be good or bad uses of this kind of stuff, are there rules, duties, guidelines that in themselves would limit the excesses, would kind of prevent the more kind of extreme uses of these data? I'm not saying I have those, but I would like someone to give them to me. The second one is to go back to this thing about agency and identity. And it seems to me part of the issue is there's a kind of asymmetry between the kind of agency that a corporate entity has, for example, where it has some of the rights of a person and it can act as a person, and these other kinds of groups which they lack that quite important element. So if I'm a member of some group, a trade union or something, I'm not sure exactly what the legal status of a trade union is. But I know that corporations can act as individuals. And it seems to me that in terms of working out how do we protect these various different groups from the abuse of their data? There needs to be some sort of parity between different things in the public and private sector, different organisations, so that you've got something like equality there, and when it doesn't matter what kind of group you're a part of. So there's a complicated thing again there in terms of the legal side of things, but that's at least one way that you could try and raise the floor up and get everyone to get to the same level of rights, if that's the right word to use.
Remind me about the first question, sir.
So the first question was about the fact that there are malevolent and benevolent possibilities for the use of data. But given that, there might be some sort of rules or guidelines that act to limit. I mean, we did kind of have one of these, the idea that you can only pull so much data in one go. So you can't build the entire database, you can just run your query and you're limited to those data points. But are there any other things that people could do that would kind of act as stabilizers or, I suppose, harm minimizing forces, so that they might also limit the benefits that you could do, but maybe there's a sweet spot where you could say, right, we're getting a lot of the benefits and we're missing a lot of the potential harms. And my question is, well, is that a useful approach, and where would that be, I suppose?
Well, the honest answer is that the conversation we're having right now and the question you just asked, as well as many other questions we have today, we're just on the verge of the forefront of the thing. So the honest answer for me is that I just need to do much more thinking. Straightforward, honest acknowledgement of ignorance is due, because we just don't know. And when I say we, it's not just me, it's anyone who has a real research interest in the issue. So that's the background. If I were to sort of guess on the spot or try anything by thinking aloud in terms of this particular must be aware, etc. Well, remember that I said I mentioned two particular ways of treating a group. One is the corporate group, where the group is actually treated as a single entity, and there will be a good parallel with the sort of legal person in legislation, where we actually treat, say, BP as a single entity. Now, I personally, at the moment, but I reserve on record the right to change my mind by doing more thinking and studying, I think that this is a more fruitful way of going forward in terms of treating groups and therefore their rights in terms of privacy in this particular context, because it would allow us to learn from the past, good lessons that we have learned from the fundamental right of individuals, and see how far and how well they can be imported when it comes to treating groups as individuals. Now, this goes back to the problems that we see before, like how do you identify the group, what makes an individual part of their group, etc. But I mean, it's not any more or any less complicated than the Kurds, in Turkey, Iran, Iraq, region, etc. I mean, how do you know that that individual does not belong? What it means? Is there a language? Is there a country? Is there DNA? It's very hard sometimes to go down to the detail without having a ad hoc discussion. So what I wouldn't try, I mean, certainly not now, is, well, there are general rules that apply everywhere. I'm sure that there are more general principles that we can devise, and then go back to the specific case, specific problem, that privacy breach for that group, and see what applies and what doesn't. Now, this, however, happens all the time. I mean, is that something that you blame the CEO or the secretary who made a mistake, or the whole company? I mean, that goes back to the legal system. So these 2 points, I feel that I can make, this ignorance and this particular strategy in view. More than that, I need more thinking.
Well, I agree entirely. The only other implication it seems to me is that you could end up having a new kind of moral responsibility, which is to organise those groups of which you are a part but didn't want to be, right? So now there's a group of people like me who didn't want to be part of this group, but someone's categorised us that, and now they're using data, using our data to do something. So we almost have a moral responsibility to our own group to start representing our interests in a similar way that a corporation would to those people. So that's a kind of interesting outcome potentially.
Yeah, but that's the same. Happens the same already on everyday life. I mean, by subscribing to a particular customer service and so on, you already.
But there's still choice there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. We're back to the again original problem, which I think was very well phrased at the beginning of the conversation. I mean, some of the groups are dynamic, and some of the groups are not made by us, are made for us by someone else. We are placed in those groups. The point seems to me important is when something goes wrong on the data privacy issue, do we have the legal tools to do something about it? Or it's just terra incognita? I mean, just like, oh, we didn't think about it, sorry. Either you go to the court, I go to the court, and Peter and Mary, but we can't do anything about the whole group. There's no group privacy as such. That seems to me just a lack of reflection. I acknowledge painfully that is on my side as well. There's a lot that needs to be done in terms of thinking. I would just like to remind the whole group that that was just an example. I know it's a very thorny and difficult to deal with, but it's just one among many issues, and there are many others. I can mention more depending on the time we have, but I would like to leave you with the impression that that was not the whole chapter. There are many other pages as well in their story, unfortunately.
I think actually that's probably quite a good point.
Point where to stop.
Well, at least take breath.
Yes.
And not your. I just get this feeling that the conversation could run and run and run. One of the things that I would like us to do as a group, to which actually we have willfully subscribed. Well, apart from Luciano, Ralph, and Jill, who were coerced into coming in, the rest of you came of your own free will. No, you didn't, because it was King's College who said, you're going, they wanted to get rid of you.
No, I think my sort of line manager was like, you never speak to anyone, go out and meet people.
By and large, we're all here willfully. BERA has a set of ethical guidelines, and they were written in, I guess they were probably written in about 2010, although they were published in 2011. And I think what we do is, we have an opportunity today, is to just take a look at one or two of the bits of those ethical guidelines and see whether and perhaps how we might encourage BERA to produce a code of civil, rewrite a bit, whatever. I've never had anybody else, but before then I need a coffee or a tea. I don't know whether there are buns out there, but I could almost do one of those again. I think probably the time has come to let you sit down at any rate. But I hope you're going to stay. Take a 5-minute break, comfort, coffee, whatever. Then come back just after 3:30. And then just address that as a group and see what our feelings are about the advice we might give to BERA. There being, I don't think there's anybody from BERA Council here today, so that gives us a pretty fair and open season on the ethical guidelines. And actually, it's not just BERA's ethical guidelines. I mean, they're very close to the ethical guidelines that come from the American Educational Research Association. Does SRHE have a set of ethical guidelines? You probably do.
No, we tend to utilise others, but in fact I'm thinking of developing some.
Yeah, jump on the bandwagon.
Well, I just think that they're all up to date
in
view of what we've been saying today.
Okay, so some coffee.
Brilliant.
And thank you again.
Thank you.